Are we able to know truths about the world? Or are they just something that we cannot reach? Socrates and Plato said that we can know truths about the world. Not only that, but we actually already knew the truths about the world, even before we were born. When we were born into the world, we crossed the river of forgetfulness and forgot everything we knew. So we're basically amnesia patients. So learning the truths of the world is actually just a process of recalling them. But there are also people who claim that we cannot know truths about the world. They're called the skeptics. There are three representative skeptics of ancient Greece: Pyrrho, Protagoras, and Gorgias. Pyrrho believed that we did not know the absolute truth yet, so we should withhold judgment on it and keep searching for it. Saying that man is the measure of all things, Protagoras argued that all truths are relative. Lastly, Gorgias believed that there is no such thing as the truth in the world, and that even if there were a truth, we could not know it. It seems that Gorgias had the strongest view of skepticism out of the three philosophers. That is why he's called a radical skeptic. Today's story is about Gorgias. In ancient Greece, there were many city-states around the Mediterranean. So there were many conflicts among the city-states. Leontinoi, a Greek colonial city-state of Sicily at the time, was in danger of being attacked by Syracuse, its neighbor. So the people of Leontinoi sent an embassy to Athens for help. The head of the embassy was Gorgias. So why did the people of Leontinoi send Gorgias? It's because Gorgias was skilled at persuading people. Anyone who talked with him or heard his speech couldn't help being persuaded by him. Becoming recognized in Athens, he traveled around Greece giving speeches. While he gave speeches, he answered questions from the audience on the spot. In particular, he gave a speech in Delphi of Athens, calling for the unity of the pan-Greek people. It is said that being impressed, the people made a golden statue of Gorgias in the temple of Apollo. Like this, the art of persuading people through dialogue or speech is called rhetoric. The original rhetorician was Empedocles. Gorgias was a student of Empedocles. Gorgias was a very famous rhetorician at the time. Now let's take a look at the skepticism of Gorgias. In his work on non-existence, Gorgias presented these three propositions. First, nothing exists. Second, even if something exists, it cannot be known. Third, even if something could be known, it cannot be communicated. In other words, Gorgias thought that the truth does not exist. Even if it did exist, it cannot be known. And even if it could be known, it cannot be communicated. In the end, Gorgias hung a triple black curtain over the truth. That is why the skepticism of Gorgias is called the radical skepticism. The first argument is about ontology. The second argument is about epistemology. And the third argument is about language. So these three propositions are arguments that span three branches of philosophy. And they weren't just wild claims. Gorgias made some logical arguments to support them. Now let's take a look at how Gorgias proved each of these propositions. The first proposition of Gorgias is that nothing exists. Let's see how this can be proved. First, let's assume that something exists. Then when did that being come into existence? There can be two answers. One is that it is eternal and has always existed, and the other is that it was created at some point or another. If it is eternal, it does not have any point of origin. Then it is an infinite being without an origin. But Gorgias says that an infinite being is a contradiction. So if we assume that something is eternal, we end up with a contradiction. Then was it created at some point in time? Then it must have been created out of another existence, which must have been created out of another existence, and that must have been created out of another existence, and so on. Like this, when we go up the line of existence, the first thing to exist must be eternal. But we saw that Gorgias thought that an eternal being is a contradiction in itself. So if we assume that something exists, we fall into a contradiction. Therefore, nothing exists. That is the proof for the first proposition. Now, let's prove the second proposition that even if something exists, it cannot be known. We can think of a unicorn or a fire-breathing dragon. But a unicorn or dragon is not a thing which exists in reality. Like this, we can think of things that do not exist. That is, our thinking and existence are irrelevant. Just because something exists, it does not mean that we can think of it. And just because we can think of something, it does not mean that it exists. Therefore, even if something exists, it cannot be known to us. That is the proof for the second proposition. Now, let's prove the third proposition. Even if something could be known, it cannot be communicated to others. We communicate things we know to others in language. But what we communicate is language, not our knowledge itself. Therefore, even if something could be known, it cannot be communicated. In short, thought and language are different. Let's think of a metaphor. If someone says this rose is red, of course we'll think of these roses. But some people can think of these roses, some people can think of these roses, and some people can think of these roses. Because this is red for this person, while this is red for this person, and this is red for this person, and this can be red for this person. Each person has a different visual system, so he may have recognized this color that he sees as red during the entirety of his life. So maybe what I say is red may not be what others say is red. The reason this happens is that the color red cannot be described in words, because the idea of red is just an experience of an individual. This problem is called the problem of qualia in philosophy. The problem of qualia can be an example of Gorgias' proposition that thought and language are not the same. Let's wrap up. The first skeptics of ancient Greece were Protagoras, Gorgias, and Pyrrho. Skepticism is the stance in philosophy that we cannot know the truth. Second, Gorgias was a radical skeptic in terms of existence, knowledge, and language. He believed that nothing exists. Even if something exists, it cannot be known, and that even if it can be known, it cannot be communicated. Third, Gorgias was a famous rhetorician of the time. Anyone who heard him talk couldn't help being persuaded.